And we are live. This is our first week of trying something a little bit different. So context is I'm in the process of starting a new business. So we're potentially going to leverage the Blitzscaling Yourself podcast as a way to document that journey. Um, Chris is going to join me in about 20 minutes, but what I'm going to do first is to record the intro kind of script or the kind of like update on what I'm doing, and that'll be used for our episodes. So, um, if any of the live viewers have questions, feel free, as always, to submit them, and once Chris joins, we will be answering them together. So today is week one of my startup journey. I'm Julien Newman, serial entrepreneur, and I'm with Chris Ye. Chris is one of the world's most famous investors. His book, Blitzscaling, was co-authored with the founder of LinkedIn. The foreword was written by Bill Gates, and it's taught at Stanford, Harvard, and Yale. First, I'm going to give an outline of my week, explain what I've been working on. Then Chris and I will discuss something that I worked on this week. This week, what we're talking about is, how and if you should be, or founders, entrepreneurs should be founding mission-driven startups. So week one, my main accomplishment has been to create a thesis for a potential business. My thesis starts with a mission, which is pretty much something that I believe in strongly, combined with a future that I see being possible and that I could create. And hopefully, what I'll discover is that others also believe in this mission. I don't have conviction at this stage that I can build a compelling business around this mission, but I do have conviction that I would personally be excited to pursue this mission. I have conviction that we're riding a wave that has already begun, and I have conviction that it'd be a valuable mission to pursue for our users, for our customers, and for society as a whole. So the rest of what I noted down in my thesis outlines the important components that everybody knows for venture scale startups. So problem, solution, potential product, go to market, the why now, defensibility. All of these are totally up in the air. The only element that I have any conviction on at this point is our mission. And the way that I have stated this V0 mission statement, it goes as follows. Together with the most promising students and the most elite employers, we are creating a better and more prestigious replacement to university education. So this mission that I'm currently exploring is rooted in my personal experience. Specifically, I dropped out of university in my freshman year. I remember at the time being told by everyone, and to give my parents credit, they weren't particularly opinionated on this, but pretty much the impression I got from the environment and all the people I knew was that this was a really bad idea. In retrospect, I'm almost certain that leaving university was the single best decision I've made in my life. A stark illustration of this is that the roommate that I had at the time, he stayed in university and completed a master's while I dropped out. By the time that roommate wrapped up school, uh, I was COO of one of the major political parties in Canada. I had built out an engineering organization for them, and that was on first name basis with prime ministers, billionaires, and Fortune 500 CEOs. The thing that I want to change in the world with this potential business, or the world that I want to build, is the thing I want to change is how promising young people spend the first 4 years of their adult life. Instead of waiting around, I believe they should be acting in the world. They should be developing their skills while they are most capable of learning new things. And they should be contributing to society while they are most energetic. Today, this problem or the situation mostly affects me as an employer. Hiring people who have gone through a university education. My belief is that, and I think this is shared by almost every manager, is that a great employee takes ownership. University teaches the opposite. It teaches that you're not in control and you need to follow, the prescribed curriculum. Another characteristic of a great employee is that the employee has a bias for action. University teaches you the opposite, teaches you to sit and wait for the right time. A great employee is thoughtful and wants to learn. University teaches you the opposite. Again, it teaches you the thinking and learning. Those are things that you should say that you're interested in, but really memorization and studying is the thing that's going to get you ahead. A great employee finally works as a team, while university is all about measuring personal success. The one that's maybe less important, but that's quite a stark example of this, is that great employees are clear and concise communicators. And university teaches you and forces you to write longer texts. They have minimum word counts on papers, which is the opposite of how the world works. In fact, there should be a maximum word count, and that maximum word count should be about a page for every single thing that you do. That's how it works in real life, but in university, it's the opposite. So I believe that this is a mission that is beneficial and is already happening for young people, for students, and I believe it's something that's beneficial. It's already happening for employers, and I want to make it happen, make this kind of like transition away from structured or back to what things were before, maybe 100 years ago, the more apprentice-based structure, and I want to do it in a way that I believe in. And this is, the core element that's guiding this one potential business that I'm working on. And what I'm going to do is bring Chris in here so that we can discuss whether it's important, and if it is, how it's important to be mission-driven as when you start thinking of a new business. All right, so I'm going to put a little video here while we're waiting for Chris, and see you guys in a few minutes.
Hello, Julien. I don't seem to hear you. Why would that be? Audio output seems to be working. So I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Nod. You can hear me. Okay. All right. And can other people hear you? Because I am getting silence. Have you got any evidence that other people can hear you? It won't let me chat. So I'm afraid I can only provide this sort of spoken communication. No. Well, that is puzzling. Do you want me to try leaving and coming back in, or do you want to try leaving and coming back in? You think it's on your end? Okay. Alrighty. I'll just wait, and hopefully that'll be taken care of soon. Volume is on. All right.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Very strange. I need to, it's the same thing that happened the first time we tried to record with Robin, where I don't know why it does that, but it shows like Melon says that that my sound is there, but it's not. I tested in another browser to be able to see it.
That is strange.
Yeah,
I don't understand. All right, but let's blaze into it, because we have another 42 minutes, and I actually am going to try to not go too much over.
Yeah. Let me put this this mic back in.
Great.
Well, so inputs, not the output of my AirPods. You can still hear me, right?
I can still hear you. There's a little bit more static or something buzzing, but now it seems to be better. No, it's still a little bit of buzzing.
Well, I'll go back to my AirPods then.
Okay, now the buzzing went away.
Yeah, it's been weird. Like this, the mic was doing that earlier. I don't know. So you kind of got this from the email maybe that I sent to you. Really, I'll have a little like monologue-ish at the beginning where I'm doing an update on what I've been working on, and then we'll discuss the component of it.
Yeah.
And the component is mission, and I think one of the things that you believe about mission is that it's a way to kind of like stay interested in your business.
Correct.
Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, because again, as I always like to say, success usually takes longer and more effort than you expected. And unless you have a reason for going other than the rational desire to continue, then you'll probably stop before you reach a breakthrough.
Yeah. And so there's a component to, mission, which is, it's something that you enjoy doing, that you think, would be good about the world. And there's a there's a kind of like a why now component that is, I think, inherently part of a compelling mission, which is like it's something that is already happening and that you are shaping in a specific way, or potentially shaping in a specific way. How would you kind of like think about that?
So I think that if there's two separate things. One is to have a mission, and you can have a mission independent of the financial value of it or economic value out of it, which is just this is something you care about. And then the second part of it is to understand, okay, is this something that I should devote myself to in the hopes of generating economic return? And there, you generally want to be able to answer the question, why now? Because if the conditions have existed for this for many years and nobody's done it, that tends to indicate that there's a reason why it's not going to work. Because the world is full of smart people who are thinking smart things all the time. And if a set of conditions has been in place for a decade and nobody's done anything about it, it's not a good sign.
And do you feel that the, let's say, independent of the, economic components,
Mm-hmm.
the fact, like the kind of like timing makes the mission more compelling, to others, kind of like intrinsically? Is that fair, or is that not?
I think that people are inherently more excited about things that are new. So there is some element to it, but I think the economic side is really the main reason I give that advice.
And so when we spoke to Blake uh, at Boom Supersonic, in my
Yeah.
mind, like that's a very compelling, like an obvious case of a compelling mission, at least for some people and for me. When we spoke to Dan Lewis, maybe that's a compelling mission, but to me, less obviously so. Like, how would you think about that?
Well, in the case in Dan's case, he had some personal experience with that particular problem area, and I think that the real thing was that it had gotten to the point where technology was capable of actually helping. And part of it is not just the technology, part of it is also that technology become mainstream and widespread enough such that the people in the industry were willing to accept it. Right? You have to have adoption, and there are certain, it's not the trucking industry is not an industry that's a real leader in adopting new technologies. You have to wait until they're actually ready, even if your technology is the right thing for them to do.
Right. So what's the, like? Do you think it's so? I think there's like a certain mission. You could say that like Dan's company Convoy has a mission, and I'm sure they do, of like helping truckers,
Right.
and it's a very compelling mission for truckers in the same way that, let's say, Dedicated, as my previous business,
Right, it was a
ha
compelling mission for people like me who had been, heads of VPs of marketing and dealing with these
correct.
issues. And
Yeah,
so I think that what your point is, I mean, what you're getting at is that Boom Supersonic, because it is specific but more general, it is easier for people to understand and be inspired by it. Supersonic planes, rocket ships, electric cars, because everyone can sort of get behind it and say, wow, that's interesting, versus trucking and lead generation and so on and so forth, which are very specific. So, yeah, I think that the one principle would be that it is often easier to get people to get behind a general problem than a specific problem. The issue is that if it's a general problem, haven't a lot of people gone after it? So you have to be even more differentiated in why you're going to succeed.
right. And when we were talking about ChatGPT, I think one of the compelling things about ChatGPT is that it was, a general problem and something
Yeah,
that, mattered to everybody. And more than a general problem, it's a problem that is generally, or something that impacts decision makers and people who have influence. Um, so, like, I assume it's easier to get, like, to do like recruiting, to get, investors on board, to get,
right.
just like people excited about what you're doing when you are dealing with
a general problem which
Has
you
great
know
salience for the people in your world. So ChatGPT, the reason it has received so much press coverage and the reason why it has gotten so much usage is because it is salient for people who are tech early adopters, people who are technology people or marketing people in technology companies, and journalists and other folks like that. It's something that is of personal interest to them. I mean, anything that is of personal interest to journalists tends to get covered a lot more. It's why certain television programs, despite not being seen by a lot of people, are considered much more influential. So a television show like Succession, for example, which is watched by very few people, but watched by every single television critic, gets a lot more attention than a show like Yellowstone, which is watched by a lot of people, but many fewer television critics.
and how much value, like, what what is the function of having a mission like Boom Supersonics? Is the main value of it that it makes a lot of other things easier because it's, it's like easier to recruit, easier to etc. Like, is that why you would want to have a kind of Boom Supersonic type mission, or do you not necessarily like? Is there no benefit to having that?
No, there's clear benefit to having that kind of mission. And you may have recalled that I recently wrote about Elon Musk, and I said, look, the secret to Elon Musk is to tackle a mission that really inspires people and which involves solving a problem that's amenable to first principles engineering. And by sticking to that formula, he was very successful with SpaceX and Tesla. He's ventured outside that formula and failed miserably wherever he's gone.
And I saw that post, and I don't know, I haven't checked LinkedIn enough to know if you. I left a comment. I don't know if you answered it, but it's
I
actually
probably did. I don't remember what the
it's
comment was, but I probably did.
kind of adjacent to this, where it's like I think it's what. So there's a point to which, so let's say like dedicated or convoy is like very technical in
Mhm.
terms of what the mission is. Um, you know, Tesla or SpaceX or Boom Supersonic is kind of like a just right mission in a certain way, while Twitter's like Elon Musk's mission at Twitter is too political, or it feels wrong in a certain way, and I can't put my
So
finger on
it's
what's
so the
wrong.
reason is simple. It's too political because it is unpopular with the talent you actually need to carry it out.
Right.
So to go into Twitter and say, okay, I'm going to stand for making speech free, which is to say allowing racists and bigots to say things, there's not a lot of smart people who are behind that mission. There are some, but not enough to actually run a successful company, which is why all these right wing attempts to build companies inevitably fail because you can't build a company with dumb people, or at least not a successful one.
So let's say like there's no like qualitative difference between, let's say, Elon Musk's mission at Twitter versus climate change stuff, other than the fact like they're relatively equal and they're both ideological. And the reason why a climate change
Mission is
mission.
more successful than Elon's mission is because more smart people who are capable believe in that mission.
So you need to have an ecosystem where the mission that you are excited about or that you're pushing for is a mission that the people that you need on board are going to believe in. And
Right,
if so let's say if you're building a software business, if all software engineers are not interested in this mission, it can be a really valuable mission. It's just not going to work out, at least
right.
as a software business.
And again, you might question, is it a valuable mission if nobody else believes in it? I
Right.
mean, there are a lot of people in this world who like to believe, I'm right, and it doesn't matter. I've reasoned this from first principles, and I'm like, I mean, maybe you're smarter than everyone else, but maybe not. Maybe you should consider that fact.
But let's say we had, so say if software engineers somehow, and engineers in general were all climate change deniers,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't matter that everyone else in society is, really on board for, clean tech. If you're trying to build Tesla, it's going to be really hard to attract engineers.
That's right.
Right. So it needs to
Exactly.
be,
It's like if you were like, oh, it's like, there's not a long history of successful technology companies focused on sports.
yeah, because
Sports is a
engineers
huge
don't like
part of
sports.
society, but the engineers don't give a shit about it.
So it's like a good mission is like a perfect mission is a mission which is, riding an existing wave, that is general and of general salience to people, and
To the people that you
specifically,
need to succeed. Yes.
yeah, the people you need to succeed, which are for software businesses, software engineers, the customers, the media ecosystem. Those are
Yeah.
probably the biggest. And where you can, and if your mission is general, which is better, that makes it more important to have a truly differentiated product, because otherwise
Right.
it's
This is where the why now comes in, right? A general mission that everyone agrees on that's been around for a while. Other people have probably tried to do it.
right. And then the way that I've been thinking about, mission for myself and my next business is that I am trying to kind of like ground what I'm doing in that. So that, like, really what I've done kind of structurally is I created a kind of GitHub organization. It's called
Mm-hmm.
like researching a new business. And then within each, within that organization, there are repositories. Right now I have one. And that repository is centered around a mission. And then I am, exploring that mission. Exploring that mission means, I create a potential, problem solution set and product, and then I do research on that. But the kind of like grounding for uh, for the um, for the business idea is it's grounded around a mission. Is that a useful way to proceed, or are there better things to ground your company around?
So I think that the best thing to ground your company around is a customer base or audience. Because the thing is, if you think about it, it's like, okay, I can ground it around a technology, but the different possible use cases might have very different go-to-market strategies. And I think that let me see, I want to make sure. Can you hear? Is the audio coming through clearly?
Yeah.
Okay. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'll move this back so I can go forward. I don't want to get too close to the screen. All right. I think that the reason why you should really use the focus of the audience or customer base is because it automatically makes the go-to-market a lot easier. And you have the ability to relatively easily pivot to different products that serve the same customer base versus, oh, I have this product, I need to pivot to a different customer base. Now I have to completely change my go-to-market strategy, and it may or may not work at all. And it's just easier to start with a given of this is an audience or market that has a lot of money and has lots of major needs, and I'm going to serve them.
So how would you? So it's like, so it's actually what Dan was saying, which is you start with a custom, like people who have problems, and
Right.
you try to understand their problems. Like that's kind of
Yeah, and I think that you pick a group of people that A, you can economically serve, and B, that you actually like.
right. So your kind of like starting point would be pick a group of people that you think you can make money serving, where like the
Yeah,
market's evolves to a point where you can, like, there's money to be made. You're not going to make money selling like eggs to poor people,
right,
as valuable as that might be. And then that you just have an affinity for and want to spend all your days helping.
correct.
And that is the kind of like the grounding. And how do you make mission kind of tie back,
You have
into that?
you have to talk to them, and because you're in some sense your mission is to serve this particular group, but that's usually not enough, right? You have to figure out which use case or which problem you're going after, and hopefully that problem has a mission that will help attract people.
Right.
Because,
So
for example, a lot of people will sell to Wall Street. There's a lot of things that people sell to Wall Street. Do people inherently say, I want to join this company because I believe in the mission of serving Wall Street? No, right? There's some other mission of some kind.
in the so what so I think one of the elements here is that your mission in a way should be to rise. It isn't about the mission that speaks to you. Of course, that matters,
Yeah,
but
it needs to
it's
speak to you, but it needs to speak to others as well. Like first it has to speak to you, then it has to speak to others, and then it has to involve a market that makes sense.
so you kind of like start with customers, like a customer. It's like, here are people who have money and have problems, and then you derive from that a mission, and that I like, and that I
Yeah,
care about, and that I
yeah,
have an affinity to, and I share problems with.
yeah,
And then I move from that into discovering the problems and converting that into a mission statement. So like a potential future that I want to build with
yeah,
them, for them,
yeah.
but it's grounded in the customers themselves.
Right. And again, that's not the only way to do it. It's just in all other things being equal, what would I recommend? Where would I recommend starting? That's where I'd recommend starting.
And when you think of, let's say, Boom Supersonic, or Tesla or
Yeah.
SpaceX.
They're starting from a different point.
Yeah.
They're not starting from my recommended point. Because let's say you go into, let's say you start building Tesla, you start building SpaceX, you start building Boom Supersonic, and it turns out you're wrong about the audience. Like, let's say Tesla couldn't sell cars to individual consumers. Now all of a sudden you have to gear up and sell some sort of car to companies. I mean, it's harder to do. Everything, all the people you hired for that are useless. You have to fire them and get a whole bunch of new people. SpaceX, we do commercial space flight. Okay, we can't do commercial space flight. We have to do something else and said, okay, we'll fire everyone. And it's just a lot harder to pivot by changing your customer base than it is to pivot by changing your product or changing some other element of what you do.
Yeah,
Maybe that's the
interesting.
best. Maybe that's the best way of putting it. Pivoting your customer base is probably the hardest pivot to make.
Yeah. And so it's really like there's a tango, or kind of like a dance between the customer problems and the mission and the solution. And in the early stages of your business, you need to be, and so it's like customer problems, customer, like a mission that speaks to your customers, the product that speaks to your customers, and then all of that, but also for you, right?
Yeah.
And for the audiences that matter. So for engineers,
Mm-hmm.
for marketers, for journalists, for VCs.
Yeah.
And you need to, at the early stages of your discovery, and of your research and of thinking of a business idea, you need to be doing that dance. And what are, like how do you do that dance, or what are your ideas on how to do that effectively?
So it is more of an art than a science, as the saying goes. And I think that the best thing you can do is sort of just try to sequence things as I've described. Figure out the audience, make sure it's something that you care about, then see if other people care about it. Right? Because if it's something that other people care about, but you don't care about it, it's not a good solution. It's not a good approach. And it's just a question of what is the most efficient way? Like, what is the most efficient sequence to filter on in order to get to an end result? Because, you can have a series of filters, but the order of the filters matters. Because if you can filter out, like, it's very frustrating. So the reason is, as you're filtering through and considering things, you want to filter down as quickly as possible, so you don't waste time, checking against three things and then running into one filter at the end. You want the toughest filter to be up front, or
And
as
toughest
much as
filters, the
possible.
customers.
Yeah.
And
Which, by the way, is great. I never even thought about why it was I gave that recommendation. It's one of these things where I had an instinct, and now you have brought out what is probably the fundamental issue, which is your toughest filter should be up front. This is exactly why we do this kind of broadcast.
yeah, it is. It's so, like, it's really interesting. One of the things, because I've been thinking a lot about, like, I feel I have enough experience now as an entrepreneur to think at a meta level about, like,
Yeah.
how to start a business, at least, not necessarily how to run it. But it does occur to me that I don't think there's a single way of
That's
starting a
right.
business, but
That's right.
there's a way of starting a business that's just better and more
Yeah.
likely to succeed.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it's really not what you're told.
Not at all.
It's amazing, like, it, the lack of, like, thoughtfulness that is prescribed to entrepreneurs, is amazing.
It's because most people are not very thoughtful, right? You're a rare bird, Julian. That's why I spend time with you, because just like today, we have derived new insights from key pieces of wisdom that I've been sharing with people for years or decades. And yet I didn't understand the reasons behind them until you began to question them.
Yeah, but you really are told, like, I was watching this YC podcast,
Yeah.
and they really, really do prescribe, like, they were explaining this guy who started this business, and it's very execution focused.
Yeah.
And when I was listening to him explain his process, I was like, you could have just thought this through, and you could have
People
saved,
hate
like,
to
a
think.
year.
People
Yeah.
hate to think. Like, thinking is uncomfortable. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. And so they want to get away from thinking as quickly as possible. People love hard work, and hard work is very necessary. But people do adopt this position of effort being so important so that they can avoid thinking, and so they can avoid taking responsibility.
Yeah. It's very, because, like, what I thought I needed to do as an entrepreneur was to just, well, ship and just get stuff into the hands of customers. And
Right. The the
that,
the the whole thing about lean startup is, and this is something I said back when it came out. Look, it's a great book, great concept, very important stuff, but too many people use it as an excuse to avoid actually taking responsibility for making decisions. You can't just sort of test your way. Oh, magically, I'll know the right thing to do. No, you've got to make choices. You'll be wrong sometimes, and you have to think about it. And it's not pleasant, because you have to confront the fact that you don't know. And you have to confront the fact that you may realize things that are unpleasant to you. But that's better than failing.
So one of the challenges with, at least for me, and this is like very meta, but
Right. And we'll
is,
probably have to transition to recording soon, by the way.
yeah,
You probably have noticed the clock. So,
the is avoiding being like overcommitted to something.
yeah.
So there's this kind of, the more work you do on anything, the more you kind of like convince yourself it's a good idea.
Sunk cost. We have
Yeah.
a difficult time. We human beings are victims of the sunk cost fallacy. People try to say strong opinions loosely held, but guess what? Strong opinions tend to be strongly held. You're going against what is natural. The best thing I can do for you is to say, try to think about it up front and try to always ask yourself, okay, what's the evidence for this? Let's actually be explicit about our learning. Let's actually be explicit about why we think this. Because if you're not explicit about it, then you fall into all the fallacies we just described.
One of the challenges, so the reason I used, GitHub is that it's
Yeah.
a like versioning system.
Right. That's
And
good.
it's kind of, yeah, it's like structured around the assumption that there are like around like non-commitment.
Yeah.
And I'm actively trying to like look for 2 or 3 businesses to research at the same time
Yeah.
to avoid what I know is my tendency, and I assume everyone else's
Right.
tendency, to overcommit.
Right. Because you say, oh, this looks good. All right, great. I don't have to spend all that time thinking anymore. Let me just make this happen. And this is something I've said many times. This is the problem with so much of our understanding of the world being shaped by movie making. Like, you never see a movie about the brilliant genius inventor who tries 75 different things and then finally finds one thing. You see instead the movie about the brilliant genius inventor who has a stroke of insight and realizes this is the thing to do, and the entire world is against him, and then somehow he perseveres and succeeds anyway.
Okay, so let's go into the
Let's
the
do it.
episode portion. I'm gonna maybe not structure this around mission after all. I'm gonna structure it around, what should be your starting point as
Yep,
a business. I'm gonna do the introduction without you, so
you got
there's
it. Okay, so we
those.
don't have to record it now.
Correct.
All
So
right.
let's say so. So Chris, welcome to week 1.
I'm excited. I'm telling you, this is going to be a great sequence within the Blitzscaling Yourself podcast. I think people are getting excited about following your journey, Julien.
So you have a very specific prescription as to where people should start when thinking
Yes.
about a business. Your prescription is start with the customers. Why should you start with the customers and their problems?
So this is really interesting because I hadn't realized my full reasoning until you began discussing it with me today in preparation for this episode. I should also note that almost no one takes me up on this advice. It's unfortunate, but nobody ever listens. So, the reason I think it is so important to focus on the customer first is because the customer is the toughest filter. So, if you think about a startup, it's a series of filters that an idea has to pass through in order to be successful. My friend Scott Johnson describes how one of his mentors once described this as how many miracles have to occur in order for this business to be successful. And if you think about it, it's like at the end of the day, you have a funnel with a set of filters. And whatever order the filters go in, the same percentage will come out at the end. So 100 ideas go at the beginning, and you filter down with a series of filters, and there's going to be a total of 3 at the end that are successful. And whatever order those filters are in, that's what happens. However, if you have a filter that cuts it down from 100 ideas to 10 ideas right up front, it's a lot better than that first filter just cutting out 20 ideas. And you examine another 80 through another filter. Then you examine 65 through a filter. Then you examine 50 through a filter. And only after you've done all this filtering of all these ideas do you go to the last filter and you get down to 3. That's horrifically inefficient. So much better to have that first filter be the tough one. And so you get down to 10 ideas right up front, and it's a lot easier to concentrate your efforts from there. Now, the reason why the customer filter is the toughest filter is because the customer implies all these other things about the business, about the go-to-market strategy, about how you sell, about all these things that are probably some of the hardest things to change. Like if you start off thinking, I have this wonderful technology. I'm going to sell it to consumers. And then partway through, you say, oh, no, that didn't work. I'm going to B2B. And this happens over and over and over in the startup world. Basically, all the marketers you have that are consumer marketers are now useless to you. Fire them, hire new people. We got to build a whole sales team because we had no salespeople before. Or vice versa. We started off B2B. No, actually, it should be consumer. Again, you have to fire everybody and completely revamp the company. And your chances of doing that successfully are very low. Pivoting on the customer, in which you pivot other things other than the customer, tends to be far more successful because more of the things stay the same. That's why it's the toughest filter. That's why it should be the filter you use up front.
So on one hand, if you pick the wrong customer, it's extremely costly to change who that customer is, even for small things. So let's say if you're doing B2B, but you go from like 100K CV deals to 30K CV deals or 50K CV deals, it actually changes like everything.
Everything changes everything.
And but then also the customers are the most choosy. They're the ones who are most likely to not be compelled enough to change their behavior to do something, just buy, that you need them to do. And
yes,
is that
and I think that's because they're the least vulnerable to charisma. So I am a very charismatic guy. And in my history as an entrepreneur, I generally found it fairly easy to convince employees to join me. I also found it relatively easy to convince investors to give me money. The hardest part was convincing customers to actually buy what I was selling.
and on a recurring basis.
On a recurring basis, the storytelling, all these things, getting people to make that one decision to invest money or take that job is a lot easier than getting people to, on a recurring basis, keep buying something that doesn't actually work for them. So that's why the customer is such a tough filter.
Yeah, so like in theory, you could go out on the street and convince anyone to buy a burger, but if you need them to buy 1,000 burgers from you throughout their life, they're not going to do it unless they actually like the burger.
Unless it's a good burger, unless it's in and out.
Yeah. So the starting point for you or in your mind is a customer problem.
Yeah.
And you need to do, get really, really specific around the customer problem. And what you're doing is a dance between the various things, that matter. So the customer problem, the solution to that problem, the mission, and all that from the customer's perspective. And then again, like, how does that talk to you? Like, do you care about this problem? Do you care about this mission? How do the other, people who matter to you, how do they think about that? So tell me a bit about this dance. Tell me a bit about who are the other stakeholders beyond the customers who matter and why do they matter?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. The most important stakeholder is you because you're starting off to create a company. You're going to be the only person who believes in it, the only person who works on it, the only person who makes things happen. And you're probably going to have to go through hell in order to get this company off the ground. So you better believe in it. You better be something that you actually care about. Otherwise, you're not going to persist long enough to get to a breakthrough point. Most things are hard. And if it's something that you don't really fundamentally believe and want to do and have enthusiasm for, it's really difficult to stay disciplined long enough to actually make it happen. Now, the next step is you need to actually convince that first other person to come on board, that co-founder, right? Getting other co-founders, employees, people who work on it with you to become part of the team. That's probably the next thing that you need to be able to do. And then after that, it is bring the investors on board. But you'll notice most people go in this following way because it just sort of seems natural in terms of number of people. They start by convincing themselves of something. Then they convince potential co-founders or employees of something. Then they convince investors of something. And only then do they try to convince customers that this is something they should have. And that is exactly the opposite. If you start with the customer, and here's the thing you're looking for in the customer, you're looking for a customer type where it is a large enough market. That is both in terms of the number of customers as well as how much money those customers have to pay you, or in the case of an advertising driven business, how valuable those customers are to advertisers and other folks like that. And a big part of it is not just the size of the customer, it's how do you reach the customer? Is it relatively easy to reach them or is it relatively hard? Right? If you define a set of customers that are totally fragmented and there's no way to reach them except one-on-one sales in person, that's not very helpful. Right? You need a market where you can find a way to reach a lot of them at once. And then finally, the really important thing is it has to be a customer that you actually like and care about. Because at the end of the day, we are human beings. We're driven by emotion. We want to help people that we like. If you don't like your customers, it's going to be a miserable time. You're going to be working, bleeding, sweating, and you're thinking, these ungrateful SOBs, why am I doing this for them? It's much better if you're like, wow, here's some people who I really admire, I really like, I want to make their lives better. And that will keep me going even when things are hard.
And this really is a dance where there's like, in a way, you do want to start, with the customer problem and work down, but it's not that linear. So there's this kind of like dance where you're like thinking about all these different things, and one of the big challenges as you do that is that you're a human, or
Yeah.
I'm a human,
Yeah.
in this case, and it's really easy for me to get committed via sunk cost fallacy to any potential idea that I might be researching. So if I do like 20 customer interviews about something, I can get overcommitted to the idea. And what are some of the tactics that you recommend people use to avoid getting overcommitted and avoid the sunk cost fallacy for themselves?
There are a variety of things you could do, but there's one overarching thing, which is to make your thinking explicit. So far too often, we are content to just go on our quote unquote gut, right? And sort of hand wave and say, well, that's obvious. Is it? If you have to write it down and make it explicit, it'll be a lot harder to lie to yourself. So if you are saying, hey, here's my idea, here's the customer I'm going to serve, here's the product, here's the problem space, here's why I think it's valuable, and you make all that explicit. And then you also, as part of writing out what you believe, say, here are things that need to be true in order for this to occur. And here are signs that this is not actually true or that we're on the wrong path. And only by making all these things explicit are you going to actually say, okay, if we encounter disconfirmatory evidence, we're going to look at it. Because if you don't make it explicit, you encounter what should be disconfirmatory evidence, you just sort of squish it away in your mind and say, well, actually, that doesn't really count because of this, even if that's inconsistent with something you said elsewhere, because you're only thinking about things in the moment. If instead you have a log of the things that you believe, what needs to be true, whether or not these theses are proving true, and recognize that the market can always change on you. Right? We went from, in the past 24 months, a market in which capital was free and interest rates were zero, to a market in which capital was scarce and interest rates were 5% or more. Well, that's a huge change. And the assumptions that you made then, even if they were true then, may no longer be true now.
And how do you think about time as a tool to avoid to be able to think in a clear manner? So like, if you are trying to get, like, if you're working all the time on your business idea, I feel as if it might be easier to get overcommitted to it. While if you give yourself like a month and you're kind of doing this while doing other things, it frees you up to be more self-critical. Like, is that a thing, or how would you think about that?
I would agree with that. I think that if you are trying a variety of things at once, you're less likely to overcommit too quickly just because it's in front of you. I think that the other element of it is it doesn't even necessarily have to be a huge amount of elapsed time. It just needs to be some time set aside to explicitly look at the assumptions, the evidence, and all those different things, to work on the business, as they like to say, as opposed to in the business. And I think you can have that discipline by just blocking it out on your calendar, maybe having a regular review. I often tell people you should go ahead and review your core assumptions at least once a quarter, if not more often.
And here, I'm at week one of my business, and what we're talking about doing is strategy, I guess, or and brainstorming, and
Yeah.
creating a business plan, and doing customer interviews and research and thought. And what's we're not talking about doing at all is shipping, and building and selling, and all the stuff that I feel is what at least I had understood were the best practices for entrepreneurs. um like how should, like, is that right? Like, is it right that you should be thinking instead of doing at first?
Absolutely. Because thinking is a lot faster and cheaper than doing. The reason we have all this, what they call it, hustle porn or what have you, is there's some unpleasant truths that we don't want to acknowledge. And those unpleasant truths are some ideas are better than others. Some people are smarter than others. And we like to just sort of say, hey, if you work hard, then you're going to succeed. And by and large, hard work does correlate with success. But do you know what correlates even more with success? Making the right decisions. And it is unpleasant to think that because then it's our own fault. We chose wrongly, or we're just not smart enough, which could happen, not to you or I, but to some other people. And that's unpleasant to contemplate as well. But we should not sort of say we're going to base our decision on how to spend the next 5 years on our lives on what makes us feel comfortable in the moment. We should make that decision based on what is going to have the kind of impact that we want to achieve.
And I've come to think about this as the kind of like 0 to 1 method. I think that's the most famous startup book, that's really about thoughtfulness in many
Yeah.
ways, versus the lean startup method, which is much more about execution. And the author of the lean startup, and
Yes.
you're proponent of it as a method. What is the, like, is it just that it's not the right approach at the very early stages of startup foundation?
Well, I think that the reason is, as is often the case with authors, and I know this myself, you can't control how people choose to interpret your work once you put it out there. So Eric Ries, a wonderful guy who I've known since before he wrote The Lean Startup, wrote this because he said, hey, people do not do enough of customer development, going out there and seeing what happens. But he didn't write, it doesn't matter what problem you choose, as long as you do customer development, it's going to work. It's just he was focused on one particular area. The fact that customer development helps you succeed does not mean it is the only factor. It is necessary and sufficient for success. It's necessary, but not sufficient. You still have to, upstream of lean startup, pick the right problem.
Well, Chris, thank you for this input on week one of my startup journey. What we're going to do next week, we're not talking, but we'll talk the following week. So it'll be week 3. And I guess, thank you for your time. Thank you for the people who joined our live stream, for everyone who's listening, and to our team, Jeremy, Shlok, and Joe, who make all this happen.
Yes, and thank you, Julian, as always, for making me think, because I think that one of the best things about this whole process is while I may have what I hope are good insights and wisdom in my brain, the fact that you are helping me challenge those thoughts and actually make them explicit so that other people can benefit from them is one of the things that makes this process and this particular podcast so special.
Cool. I'll let you run.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that was great. And obviously, as you know, everything I say when we're broadcasting is true and I mean it. And I want to just emphasize again, I had never thought about why I always told people to start with the customer. I was just like, okay, I mean, yeah, it's because it's harder to, but the fact that it is the first filter, that is an insight that now will help me explain to people. Maybe they'll even listen to me more when I say that.
Yeah, well, it is amazing how much, like, being able to explain the why to people is very convincing.
Yeah.
Um,
And
it-
you're helpful at doing that because I've reached the point in my career where I explain things and people are just like, well, the great Chris Ye said it, so it must be true, as opposed to saying, well, why? Like, oh, yeah, that's a good question. Why is that?
yeah, well, as you know, I do that, to a fault. Like,
You have to find the person who appreciates it. That's the key.
correct.
Not everyone appreciates it.
Most people, would rather just, have pleasant conversations. While I am very, very incisive, or very, very dead set on trying to figure out the accurate answer. So.
Well, I'm glad we're doing this project, and sorry I'll be out of town next week, but I'll look forward to 2 weeks from now.
I want to tell you,
Oh,
if
yes.
you have to jump, I can send
I
this to you by
do.
email.
Alas, I do
I'll
have to
email you.
jump. Perfect.
Okay, bye.
See you soon.